Welcome again to this CAV TV program, Thoughts and Talk. Our guest today is Dr. Wendy Welch, who has taught cultural anthropology at this college and is currently the executive director of the Graduate Medical Consortium of Southwest Virginia. But she is most famous for her new book, The Little Bookstore of Big Stone Gap, just published by St. Martin's Press. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
We'll be talking about Wendy's new book, and we also have with us a student discussant, Laura K. Rogers. Loopy is the student coordinator of this program. She is a senior administration of justice major. Laura has served on many leadership positions here at this college, on the SGA Senate, as a resident advisor, creating the College Debate Club, the Socratic Society, and involvement in the honors program. She plans, upon graduation, to work in law enforcement while pursuing graduate studies, and we are very grateful that she is here with us today. Dr. Welch, your book describes, in a very charming and witty way,
Oh, good.
how you and your husband, Jack, left a sort of high-powered job in a major city to start a used bookstore in a big old house here in Southwest Virginia, in Big Stone Gap. Hence the title of the book, The Little Bookstore of Big Stone Gap. In a fascinating and humorous way, Dr. Welch's book describes the adventures of starting a new business in a new place, and especially as a daring one in this day of opening an old-fashioned used bookstore. Your book has been widely reviewed already, widely and favorably reviewed. I think the one I like the best, and I think captures this book, which I encourage everyone to read, it's just fascinating, was in Booklist, which said of your book, amusing, engaging, astute, and perceptive, Welch's buoyant memoir of an endangered way of life is a fervent affirmation of the power of books to bring people together. So I guess you didn't know you were an endangered species, did you?
We had a kind of an inkling that we were, but we didn't care.
Well, it's wonderful to read, and I think the first thing that strikes this reader is, given your busy and exciting life, multiple jobs, the complexities of running a used bookstore, the first thing that struck me was, when did you have time to write this book?
Well, people ask us about how we get everything done that we get done, and I can come up with two things that contribute to it. One is the commute from Big Stone Gap to the college here at Wise is 28 minutes. So you leave the radio off, you have 28 minutes going out and 28 minutes coming back in which to simply think, which is really, really handy. A lot of the plotting of the book got done on the drive in and the drive out. The other thing is we don't have a television. And if you don't have a television, it's amazing how much spare time you can find in your life. I'm not anti-TV, I'm not a TV snob. If you don't watch TV, if you have to actively turn on the Netflix and turn on the computer to get going, you get a lot of spare time.
So, what is your writing habit? I know I have to write early in the morning while I still have some gray matter. And do you have a certain routine like that, or do you write at different times?
No, in fact, I think that's why we were able to get it done. When I wrote it, my husband kept reading it. Every time I wrote something, he read it and he made comments on it. I have a laptop that goes with me everywhere. I have a little laptop a little notebook that I travel with, and then my larger laptop. And I keep the file on my keychain on a zip drive, and wherever I am, and I have 20 spare minutes, that's where I'm writing. So none of the, process of getting ready to write, none of the darkened room and 20 minutes alone. Just here I am. I'm in the doctor's office. I'm in the bookstore.
Really?
Yeah, fairly often I would be sitting in the bookstore working on the book, and someone would come in, and I'd stop writing, and I'd get going with them. On the one hand, sometimes I think, that was a really good moment, and now I can't remember where I was when I was writing that part. But on the other hand, when you get interrupted and you come back, the process of having had time to turn it over in your head was actually fairly beneficial. There was no pretension in writing this book about any creative process. It was done in spare time.
I think that's how Anthony Trollope wrote.
Probably.
So he wrote on trains and in the living room with his children around him, and I think Leo Tolstoy did too. He wrote.
He had a lot of kids, so.
Train stations and so on.
Just get it done.
That's very interesting. That's an unusual way of writing, as far as I know. Authors, you don't even always have a cup of tea.
I don't always have a cup of tea, and Jack and I have laughed because the bookstore is downstairs and we live upstairs. Jack has an office upstairs where he does his radio programs. I don't have a room that I write in. I just take my laptop and I sit in whatever chair looks comfortable, and that's where I write. We've kind of thought about this a couple of times. Do I need an office?
So you're sort of a gypsy.
Comfortable, yeah.
Kind of a gypsy author. You wander like a nomad.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
It's fun.
Well, I think one of the most delightful aspects of your book is your clever use of language. I don't think I've read so many quotable quotes since Mark Twain.
Oh, no.
And I just want to read a couple of them. In the beginning of the book, when you were visited by a policeman in the middle of the night, right after you'd moved into your big old house to start, and it had been empty for a long time, so obviously the policeman thought you were a burglar. It was a very amusing description of, 3 in the morning when you went down there to try to stop the policeman from attacking the house. You write of your dog's lack of assistance when you're being broken into.
Yeah.
And I found this amusing. On page 5, you said, "We have a black lab, Zora. She's a good watchdog, asleep upstairs. And Bert, our terrier, is a total yipster. Barks at everything, also sound asleep."
Yeah. They were a big help to us in those early days in security.
They knew the
place.
important things.
Yeah.
And in talking about leaving a prominent job in a big city, that was Washington, D.C., right? The Snake Pit?
It wasn't D.C. A lot of people think it was D.C., and a lot of people from D.C. have come to me and said, we long to escape as well. But everybody has a snake pit. It doesn't necessarily matter where it was.
I see. Well, when you left this big city job to move to a small town, you said, I think, paraphrasing Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, life is not about who gets the biggest chunk of someone else's flesh.
Yep. That's what the snake pit was like, unless you're a zombie.
Unless you're a zombie, right.
You kind of have to continue to be
so
if you're going to work.
living working in a big office and big important things, and it turned out to be pretty bad, huh?
It was not the way we wanted to live.
Drove you right to the country. Well, that's sort of what drove me here. You know, I lived in New Jersey before coming here, and just the thrill of being in a town with one stoplight. It was all over. I never went back.
Yeah.
And you described moving to a remote rural area as possibly not showing something, possibly not showing, as you put it, on page 15, the foresight God gave mayflies.
Yeah. We waltzed into an area kind of known for being insular with, our eyes tight shut and expected everybody to love us because we came bearing books. And we didn't think too hard about the fact that we didn't know anyone in the town, or that small towns are known for being polite and hospitable without making friends easily.
Right, and yet your background in ethnography You have a PhD in ethnography or folk studies from Memorial University of Newfoundland.
Yeah.
How did that benefit or was a detriment to your appreciation of a different kind of culture?
Well, I could put a name to everything that was happening to us. I just couldn't stop it happening. Yeah. I could see people being polite and hospitable, and I could recognize stranger value, you know, people talking to us more than they would talk to their own family. But at the same time, I could see that insular assumption that you're not from here, and therefore you have come here to do some unspecified evil. At some point you're going to try to change us. You came with a bookstore. Are you trying to tell us we're not smart people? You have to kind of, there's a term, again, you can name it without changing it. There's a term called cultural humility, where people come into a region and need to take their cues from the people around them as to how they act and what they talk about. It's used a lot in public health, which I work in for my day job. But what fairly often happens is people come in from a university. They have this great idea for this great program, and they don't ask the town, do you need this? They just say, look what we've got for you. And fairly often what was happening, I think, in the early days of the bookstore was people assumed we had come in with the bookstore in a missionary kind of way. We have come to help you. We have come to help you read. As opposed to just, we're here, we're opening a bookstore, y'all come if you want to. A lot of people came to our opening celebration when we opened the bookstore officially. Adriana Trigiani came and cut the ribbon for us, and we filled the house with people. And a lot of people later, now we've been open for 6 years, but people are just admitting now that the books come out that they went home from that party and said to their spouses, they're nice people, I give them a year. And one of the greatest compliments we got when the book did come out is one of the council members of Big Stone Gap came to us and said, you know what? Y'all beat the odds. You're here. And there are a lot of new businesses that started that didn't stay. And I think one of the reasons we stayed is that we figured out fairly quickly that we had to be just ourselves. Nice, polite, culturally humble people. Just hang in. We've got a bookstore. Come in or don't. We're not trying to push anybody's agenda on you. We actually at one point put up a sign for the Democratic and the president and the Republican president. You know, like, we are an idea house. You can be anyone you want. You can have any space you need in here. We're not pushing one agenda or another, and that helped a lot.
Nonpartisan. Okay.
Very nonpartisan. We talk of it in the book as a third place. We're not your home. We're not your work. We're not your church. We're a place where you can come and be yourself.
Right, and yet I think somewhere in the book you mentioned that you are from the Central Appalachian region.
I'm from Greenville, which is about an hour and a half down the road from Big Stone Gap. But because it's across the state line and has a separate football team, I may as well be from San Francisco. Yeah.
Or Appalachia. Right?
Yeah.
Or Pound.
Yeah.
Right.
It's if you're from outside the football zone, buddy, you are from someplace else.
Well, and of course, many areas that are remote have suspicions of outsiders, and especially outside. You know, the Native Americans had a problem, outsiders coming in to civilize them.
That kind of thing. I have heard similar comparisons of work done in the Middle East. So.
Right. I guess where I grew up, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, which was often described as not a city as much as a large German village, because it was already sort of multicultural. There were English, French, Polish, German, African Americans. I guess I never had that feeling of sort of inside, outside.
Yeah, it would behave differently.
Yeah. But you mentioned coming in then and starting a new business and starting a used bookstore without any experience or knowledge. But you mentioned on page 31, hope coupled with hard work can trump even stupidity.
Yeah. We actually, new students, new graduates, when they're going out from their student days and looking for jobs, fairly often they apply for everything that moves with this kind of belief that knowledge is equaled by desire. If you want something, then you should be able to do it. And you have to learn fairly quickly that what you've learned to do has to be translatable into what you want to do. And my husband and I didn't have any retail experience. We knew a lot about books just because we liked to read them, but we had gaping holes. Neither of us were big into romances. I hadn't kept up with the science fiction field. My husband tends to read a lot of politics and history and social commentary, but he doesn't read war thrillers. So there were sections that we knew a lot about and sections we didn't know anything about. And when we actually started the bookstore and looked at the way the library had their books organized, I kind of turned to him and I said, we don't have any romances. Do you think that's going to be a problem? He's like, probably we should get some in. So we didn't know what we were doing. We just set out with, our sleeves rolled up to get it done. And I think the biggest thing about that is what we said there is hope coupled with hard work. Americans are told all the time, follow your bliss, but if you're not prepared to put some real elbow grease behind your bliss, it's not going to take you very far down the path, and that's what we found out.
Well, no, it's fascinating. I don't know business very well either, and the way you describe getting books, how you arrange, not just selling them, but trading them, having a system of trading to get things going, the sources for getting books. People donate books to your store, and even that great big Edwardian house down there in Big Stone where I live, you started getting kind of covered over with books, didn't you?
Eventually, yeah. We opened with 3,500 books, and the front room of our house was the only room we had open at that time, and the books were lying side by side, not quite touching each other. It looked like a book morgue. They were just lying with their spines out. We're like, this is terrible. We got to get some more books. So once we got our trade policy going, and once we passed the 6-month hurdle where people thought, okay, well, they haven't closed yet, they might actually be in this for a while, people started bringing us books. We now have 38,000 books in the house and another 3,000 books out in the Love Shack, which is where the romances got sent.
Yeah, we won't go into that.
You close the doors at night.
That's a cute idea. And you have other rooms that have cute names, don't you?
We have the Guys with Big Guns section, which is where we keep the Westerns and the war books.
Guys with Big Guns.
Guys with Big Guns.
Military and Western books.
Yeah. And we have the history section, which is divided into winners and losers. we just thought that made it simpler. These are the guys, they're telling their own stories. These are the guys telling
This isn't the Library of Congress catalog system, is it?
No, this is the Jack and Wendy make it up as they go along system. We used to have a chick lit section, and we ripped that apart and put in Southern fiction and general fiction and historical fiction.
What did you say, chick?
Chick lit.
Chick lit. Oh, the gender studies.
Yes, that kind of thing. Yeah. You probably don't want me to tell you what we call the gender studies section.
Probably don't.
Not on television.
But you have another, you mentioned at the end of the book now, you're expanding, you just started one little room that's a different section, maybe art books or something?
We've started taking in new books, and we have a special section basically where we're now stocking through Ingram and through my own publisher, St. Martin's Press, some new books that are bestsellers. But it moves very, very fast, so it's not so much a room with a title as this is where we're putting the bestsellers, and they just zip in and out of the shop.
Okay. Well, obviously you've made a success of it, but you didn't go into it just as a business. Obviously this was a kind of mission field and a love for books, love for people. And you sort of wrapped this up, I thought, nicely on page 200. You said, running a bookstore is one big bundle of paradoxes. It is joyfully absurd, yet about the time you think you'll die laughing, someone comes along with a story that breaks your heart. And of course you have experienced that, not only developing sort of community events like the Celtic Day, Celtic Weekend in Big Stone Gap, which I've been involved in, or my church has, and other sort of reading groups and Irish dancing and so on, or Celtic dancing. But you also have experienced being, how was it you put it, sort of a literary pub? People come in and tell you all their troubles, sort of like a bartender?
We call it being an intellectual pub.
Intellectual pub.
Yeah. One of the lines that gets quoted a lot from the book is that we said when we started, we thought that the really incredible stories were in the books. And the stories that would break your heart, the stories that would make you laugh, the stories that would make you rethink the way you think about something were in the books. And the more we met the customers coming into the shop, the more we realized that the stories are in the people. They are living books. They have to tell you their stories or they're going to die. And being the bookstore, we're the space where they can do that. It doesn't linger for them. If they tell the story at home, if they tell the story at work, there are consequences to that. But they can come and tell the story to us, and it's part of the big eternal library of humanity. And we really, really like that.
As you said, what happens in the bookstore stays in the bookstore?
So until the book was written, it did.
Well, you did change some of the names.
I changed a lot of names.
But anyway, I was really struck, and many of your reviewers have been struck by your linguistic felicity.
Does that mean I write good?
At least.
Well, thank you.
You really do have a way with words. Delightfully. It was so funny. I shouldn't say this, but it really is rare that I can't put a book down. And I really enjoyed reading this. I don't remember when I've really enjoyed reading a book. Since most of what I read is, pretty dry academic stuff.
Winners and losers history.
Right, winners and losers history, and I can never figure out which is which. But honestly, to what do you attribute this linguistic, or your gift for writing? Is it your past reading? Is it your culture? You're not Irish by any chance?
No, Welsh. I used to be a reporter. So I'm not allowed to have writer's block. It couldn't happen.
Oh, right.
You weren't allowed. Yeah. You wrote because you had to write. So I guess that's part of the way you were talking about earlier of how my process of writing might be a little different than some people's. I think that's one thing about it. You're not allowed to have writer's block. You got a page. You got 20 minutes. Go. So it's amazing what comes out when you're not allowed to criticize yourself as you're doing it.
Right.
And if I were giving advice to new writers, that would be the first thing: is turn off that voice and just write it down. You can burn it later if you want to. Just write it down. Yeah. You can do anything you want. That's your draft. Nobody has to see that but you. Just write it down. Then you can start playing with it and deciding whether you're going to revise or burn. That's entirely your call. But if I were talking about why I like to write, it's as much organization as anything else. People ask me, why did you do this? And I thought, well, because it was there. Have you ever seen Play-Doh on the table and you just stick your hands in it and go? It's cooks cook because the food is there to be cooked with. Musicians play because there's an instrument in the room. Writers write because words start forming in their heads and they write them down. That's the way the world works. There's no incredible mystery about the process. You either like words or you like Play-Doh or you like food. Everybody's got a medium. Once you find yours, you're going to have a really good time with it, and whether you publish or not. I'm really, really glad the book got published, and I'm really, really glad so many people like it and are finding in it a story that resonates with them. But I wrote it because it was there.
Right.
The oldest cliche in the book, I know.
You just, like Fred Astaire has to dance, you have to write.
Yeah. That's kind of how it goes.
Do you revise? Or
copiously.
Is this the first draft?
No. Yeah. I revised, and then when my editor got a hold of it, she revised. And one of the coolest things about actually getting published through a publishing house, as opposed to self-publishing, is that someone else reads it and points out to you when it's important to you and when it's important to the story. That is really helpful, especially in memoirs. It's really easy to get caught up in your own story and to think, this is the core of it, this is why I'm writing this, and your editor comes along and she says, no, it's not, this is why you're writing it, look how this story flows. That second voice, a trusted voice, not your friends, you trust your friends, but not a voice that likes you, but a voice that wants the story to flow. My editor and I like each other, but our loyalties were mutually to making this story go. And she was brilliant.
So you're saying a writer, particularly a memoir, or partial memoir, can it go off on tangents?
Yes, can go off on my mother-in-law, or my I was hard done by. You know, the snake pit, instead of being a 4-second small part of this book, we left the snake pit to rebalance our lives. The book could have been about the snake pit, and what would that have been fun for? You know,
Right.
and my editor knew when to turn from one thing to the other.
Yeah, just the two examples you gave were pretty scary.
Everybody's got one.
I don't think I could have taken 3 or 4.
We didn't. We left.
Well, I think that's a good lesson too. And so many people, and I'm sure you've heard this in the responses. So many people who live in the Northeast and live in cities and office jobs really would like to live in the country, in a small town, and follow their dream, whatever it is, teaching, writing, having a small business,
Yeah.
a cupcake shop. Have you heard a lot of that? I mean, in the responses, have you gotten that kind of, how do I do that now?
We've had a lot of people say, oh, I dream about running a bookstore. And the nicest response I got along that line was actually from a graduate here. I don't know how many people would remember Wycliffe Farquharson. She graduated about a year ago.
Very well.
She's living in Asheville, and we were doing a book talk in Malaprops in Asheville, one of the great bookstores of America, Malaprops. So Wick came and brought a few friends, and she bought a book afterwards, which I felt guilty for because she's a struggling student, but there it is. You know, she bought a book, and she went home, and the next day, 24 hours later, she emailed me, and she said, I really am so happy to have read your book, because now I know that it's possible to work for a life of happiness as opposed to a life of stability. That isn't exactly what she said. It's paraphrased. I actually put it up in my book news section. It was such a nice affirmation of what the book had meant to her. After you write a book, it isn't yours anymore. People read what they read in it, you know. But Wick and a whole bunch of other young women, particularly like women not yet 30, have sent me emails saying, okay, now I know I can actually go for the kind of life I want. And it's not, I want to run a bookstore or I want to run a cupcake shop. It's just, I know that I don't have to sell my soul for security. And I didn't know that was a main theme of the book. I can see now where people are getting it from. But it really is nice to know that you've told people that they can beat the system.
Sort of what society tells you have to do in a career.
You're supposed to do it like this.
Right,
Yeah.
and there's this image of success.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're saying, I realize now I can do other things, that I don't have to follow that social definition
Exactly.
of success.
And one of the things that's come up, that word you bring up, success, is really interesting, because one of the things that come up with that is, okay, the book got blurbed in People magazine, which has 3.5 million circulation and is not an academic publication.
No.
So it was really interesting to have this book, which is about an academic who goes off and starts a bookstore in a small town in the middle of a depressed economy, be blurbed in People magazine, full stop, in the first place. But secondly, People magazine said they got out in the middle of this horrible situation of not very many customers and all the e-books coming up, and they made a success of the shop anyway. And it's that word success, because people began to assume that our shop was rolling in money. And one of the things I said at Malaprops is, when People magazine calls you a success, people began to think that you were getting invited to parties where
rich,
Elton John
yeah.
was appearing, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, no, what made us successful was that we are 6 years on, still in our community, we still have enough to eat, we can still pay our health insurance, and we still have this string of wonderful people who are coming through the shop telling us their stories. You know, dropping $20 at a time. It's not about the financial success. You have to have enough money to eat, and after that, what a bookshop gives you is personal, emotional, intellectual fulfillment.
Yeah, well, you make it pretty clear, I think, at the end, it's more like survival. I mean, you're not rich, but
Nope.
you're able to survive doing what you love,
The house
And-
stays warm in the winter, and we have enough to eat.
and you're happy and fulfilled, and that really sort of social expectations of having such and such a house and a title and that much money, really, you don't have to be dominated by that.
The social media large definition of success and the reality of what we did are kind of getting tangled up or dichotomized, if you like, because when People magazine says you're successful, people have one assumption, but what you know is going on in your bookstore is what you're happy with, and that's what those women are reacting to in the book. I did not know that I wouldn't have to sell my soul. Now I know I don't. I'm really happy about that.
Well, that's a useful lesson to learn.
We feel pretty happy to have been able to promote it.
It's good that everyone learned that they don't have to sell their soul. And we have our student, I know, has some interesting questions. Laura?
Welcome, Dr. Welch, to Thoughts and Talk. I really appreciate your time here because I'm a fan of your work, of course, as well as a fan of your bookstore, even before this book was published. I've remember coming to a few events, which you kind of alluded to in your book, and I'm very, very happy to have you here. And I just have a couple of questions for you, and I just also wanted to mention that there are a lot of interesting, very inspiring themes in your book that do relate to, women as such as myself who are unsure whether in this economy, whether we're going to go towards, what do we want, stability or happiness. So first of all, I wanted to ask that there's a lacking of your life as a professor and then your home/store life. And I'm sure there's a purpose, but what is that purpose and why?
Okay, I didn't understand the word. Just a lacking?
A lacking, sorry.
A lacking of my life. You mean in the book I don't talk about being a professor very much?
Yeah, not very much. Like you kind of keep it like that back.
Probably because I knew I was moving on from teaching. I was winding up my time teaching. I was moving more toward the work with the Rural Graduate Medical Education Consortium. One of the things that people say sometimes is, well, you have a day job, right? Yeah, I do have a day job. My husband's not an American citizen, and the only way we can insure him, because he's over the age of 65, is if I have a day job. So there was that element of that, but then some people kind of wanted to interpret that as, oh, well, the bookstore isn't enough for you, it's a failure, you must need this day job. And I thought, well, no, because I actually see the work I do with GMEC, the Education Consortium, as this rural-urban split that, again, defines the way we want to live. People who live in Appalachia are fairly often willy-nilly whole cloth held up as failures because we don't live in big houses, we don't move away from our families, we don't fit the mold of upward success. You graduate from college, you're expected to go to New York City, get yourself a small apartment, and starve for 3 years until you hit the big time, And this American dream needs to be rewritten. I swear it does. This is the reality of what we want in life should be individual and specific. We should get to define our own lives. We should not be told by People magazine. I'm grateful to them for blurbing my book, but we should not be told by People magazine what we're supposed to want. It's up to us. And I think what happened fairly often is when talking about being a professor, when talking about being a member of the college community, people couldn't understand that I saw those two things as synonymous, that the work I do to bring medical professionals to the region, that's what my job is. Right. I try to get medical professionals to come here, was showcasing the way we live here, not just in a positive light with positive spin, but the realities of how good it is to be a member of a community here. So if the book leaves a lot of the GMEC and college work out, it's probably because there are only so many pages you can use, and the subplot of trying to explain what we've just been talking about in terms of success means this, wouldn't fit that in fast enough for people to get. I'm grateful to you for bringing the question up, because this is something I think Americans don't handle well. What do we mean when we say success?
Right.
Yeah.
Another question I have is that I've read the book, of course, and I found that you kind of make a disparity almost between an us, as in like you and Jack, who are, I don't want to really say foreigners because you've of course integrated, but at first you were kind of foreigners, and then them, which is like the communities, where you're embedding to. And that's, of course, another criticism. A lot of the criticism I've seen about the book is about that disparity between us and them. So how do you address that?
Okay, there's an us and them feel to the book, you mean? When it's Jack and me against the world?
Almost.
Okay, yeah. When we got there, It kind of was. When we started in the community, we made some mistakes. We got on the wrong side of a couple of social cliques. We didn't understand how people were perceiving some of the ways we lived our lives. We were Quakers, which everybody thought was weird. There aren't very many Quakers in the community.
Right.
So instead of explaining those things, we just went, okay, you think we're weird, that's fine. And we finally realized that maybe people wanted us to talk about what we were doing. It's like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, we didn't really start a church in the bookstore so much as we invited the other Quakers that we found in the community to come to the bookstore and stay. And that us and them slowly began to move. I think that's one of the things that happens through the book. It does start very us and them. We were scared when we realized that we didn't have the right friends, that we didn't know what we were doing, and that we didn't have enough customers. We thought we would fail as a bookstore. In learning to be part of the community, in learning to not completely remold ourselves, but be culturally humble and friendly, we moved from us to them. And the last chapter, not the last chapter, but the next to the last chapter, is about Jack becoming an American citizen. Right. And there was a sentence in there, I'm not sure if it's in the advanced reader copy, but it's in the final version, that says, when we came to Big Stone, it felt as closed as the gates of Fort Knox. And then these men in the Mutual are slapping my husband on the back and offering to buy him breakfast because he's become an American citizen. And it wasn't so much in and out as that the borders dissolved. And I think that's one of the movements through the book. If people don't like the us and them at the beginning, I'm sorry, that's the way the world does work, but it moves to an embracing and community build at the end.
Right. And so, of course, the last question would be, of these future plans of what you have. There was an interesting quote that you put on page 88, is if you ask somebody outside Central Appalachia to name our region's top export, they would say coal, but the more accurate answer is college students. And I know that another, as a college student myself, at first I did want to move, but now I fell in love with the region and I want to stay as well. But I've also noticed that the majority of students do want to move, and a lot of professors do move after a while. Is that what you and Jack plan to do, or do you plan to retire? What do you all want to do? Is there a part 2 of the book? So many questions.
Well, it's 2 different questions. There is a part 2 of the book that has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about our greatest export being you. Mm-hmm. This is where my work with the bookstore and my work with GMEC and the college completely overlap each other. Every year, our population grows by 5% in the 65 plus category and drops by 15% in the 18 to 25s. We educate our college students and we send them out into the world, and we don't get them back until they're getting ready to retire or their kids are graduating from high school. And one of the things that I pray we're doing here at this college, and I pray that other colleges are doing, is teaching you not just the skill you want to learn to be a communications major, but teaching you the internal fortitude to plant yourself and create a job for yourself. I don't think everyone should take a business class, but I do think everyone should know that if you're going to stay here, you're going to have to make your own road. You cannot walk a path where you get to New York City and get the apartment with 6 other girls and starve your way to the top. You have to start here in your grandmother's basement or in the trailer, the double wide on your parents' property, and move forward. And that is a viable, successful, honorable career path that the magazines don't tell you about. And I'm afraid that kids your age are getting fed a pile of hooey about what you should want.
Very true.
And I'm afraid that the college is not teaching you that the double wide on your parents' lawn is a good option and an honorable one, because it looks odd in the great scheme. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying that you should want to live in a trailer or that you should not want to live in a trailer. I'm saying that to make your way forward, you're going to need more than just what you learned in class.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure thing.
And if I could be a political theorist for one moment.
You?
We knew it was going to happen.
I know you look at everything through sort of cultural anthropology, and
You look at it through?
I look at it through political theory and sort of ideological systems. If you'll permit me, just one. And remember, we're all opposed to violence. You're a Quaker, you're a pacifist, remember that.
I'm opposed to violence.
You're opposed to violence, and you're not going to do anything.
To you?
When I say this.
All right.
But as a sort of political culture scholar, what I hear you describing there is something like a pretty traditional American culture of individualism, creativity, entrepreneurship, and just, not being boxed in certain categories. Is that true?
Not being incorporated into selling your life before you realize you've sold it.
And the positive part, and why I think this is so timely, the positive message is that in fact you can do that.
Yeah, you
and
can.
you've shown
Yeah.
you can do that.
It looks funny, but you can do it. Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's a very American kind of attitude.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see where it would run right into the whole, pull your socks up and get on with your life, rugged individualism. And maybe it is, an element of the return to that. I think as we've more and more gone to large corporations, we've had less chance for people to examine why they're making the decisions they're deciding to make. It's real easy to do a one-click shop. It's real easy to take the first job you're offered out of college. Maybe
Or
if
the
you think
security
about it.
those women are talking about, or stability as identifying with a large corporation, or just large organization. I mean, it could be private, it could be a government agency.
Yeah.
A
Oh, yeah.
large government bureaucracy.
Yeah.
If I get in there, I've got job security. We know that might not be true.
I think all the narratives are up for grabs, and the way we live our life is up for grabs. And people should make the decisions they make because they're the decisions they want to make, or because they're doing the right thing for themselves and their family. And after that, I don't think anybody else gets to tell you what to do.
That's a very independent, again, I have to be an American political theorist, but I mean, that's sort of American independence kind of attitude, and it certainly has been inspiring to many people. And how has the, pardon the expression, success of your book affected your life now with the bookstore and your writing?
We've met a lot of interesting people. We've met a lot of the students who, email me. You're teaching your class at night. You see your students once a week. You read their essays, and you find out that some of them are very brilliant people, but you don't get to know them very well, in those 15-week intervals. And then to have someone like Wick, to have Loopy talking about, this is what I saw, this is what I heard. You think, connection, that human connection we all long for, the, Facebook for real, that feeling. And there are all these people who are liking our bookstore on Facebook and sending us messages. And I always try to respond to them, and they're always, I'm so grateful to you for answering me personally. I'm thinking, do you think I'm sitting around in a gold-plated bathtub? Of course I'm going to answer you. You're an interesting person. And to have those conversations that we wouldn't have had if this book hadn't come out is a really enriching part of our life. We're really, really enjoying that. I don't know if we're going to get a brick through the window from some of the things we describe in the book or not, but overall, those conversations with people we didn't know existed, out on the West Coast, up in Maine, people we're never going to meet face to face, who are talking about their lives. So those conversations are wonderful.
Well, they're saying they're surprised you responded personally because of this same sort of large organizational outlook that you're important and I'm nothing. I never expected to get anything back from you that wasn't a form letter.
Yeah,
right?
People, that is not the way Jack and I want to live our lives.
So you don't tell them to talk to your agent?
Not unless they're asking me to do something. If they want me to read a manuscript, it depends. But if they just want to talk, no, that's great.
So I just have one more question I want to ask you before we wrap up here. Could I put in an order for 3 of these for Christmas gifts?
You can, and in fact, if you order them from the bookstore and you order 3 or more, you get a discount. They're $20 each instead of $25.
Such a deal. Now,
Yes.
when I read this, I thought of at least 3 people,
Yeah.
mostly family members, who will just love it. My
good.
sister Barbara's a real bibliophile, and practically lives in her little community library up in Warwick, Rhode Island.
Good for her.
And she is going to go absolutely mad with this. So I called her and said, don't buy this.
Getting
It'll
it
be
for
coming as a
Christmas.
Christmas gift. So I will be visiting the little bookstore in Big Stone Gap to pick up my 3 copies
Lovely.
before Christmas. Thank you so much.
Thank you for
It's
having
been
me on.
wonderful. Thank you,
Thank you.
Lupi, for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks to the staff for all being here in this edition of Thoughts and Talk.